We're not really questioning the Bengals offense at all heading into 2026. We're really wondering what the defense is going to be. And through a week of training camp practices, they've been pretty darn impressive to start things off for the Cincinnati Bengals.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. The Bengals have gotten through their unpadded part of training camp practice, and today we're going to talk about the themes. He's Joe Goodberry. I'm Jake Liscow. We're your hosts of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We're going to talk about the Bengals transitioning to a 3-4 defense, the Bengals getting under center even more than we thought they would, where I was still a little skeptical personally that was going to be something they would commit to in this training camp. We're going to finish today's show a little bit later with an update on what some of these roster battles we anticipated have looked like through a few days, where obviously games will change those later on. But so far, we have an idea of what these roster battles look like. And we're going to get started with this very clear transition for what has been a successful start to training camp for the Cincinnati Bengals defense to a base 3-4 defense. It's really going to lean in to that identity. In an episode brought to you by FanDuel, where you can join the action at FanDuel.com to play daily dingers to make your free pick on who's hitting a home run this MLB season. But Joe, let's get started with this shift in defensive identity. They've been, for the Joe Burrow era under Lou Anarumo and even last year under Al Golden, a very hybrid, very multiple defense. And it'll still look like that to some degree, I think, but on base downs, and we talked about this a little bit when we talked about Dexter Lawrence's impact so far in the bonus episode on Saturday. And with Dexter Lawrence at the center of all of this, the Bengals are going to be a 3-4 defense when they're in base personnel, when they're matching 12 personnel from opposing offenses, or 13 personnel, meaning multiple tight ends on the field for opposing offenses. And that comes with a bit of a different approach in those base downs than we consistently have seen from the Bengals over the last several years.
Yeah, I think we can call this. I think we can say they're a 3-4 defense through and through. If you're playing Madden, or if you're looking at depth charts on the internet, pick the 3-4 defense, for Madden. And if the team, or if the website uses a 4-3 defense, just throw it out, find a new one, because I think we should all be updating what we think this Bengals defense is. And it largely happened when they signed Mafe because of the role and the way he was used in Seattle. I talked about it then in March. And then the trade for Dexter Lawrence was like, okay, you're getting the nose tackle in the NFL. And then I think the second round pick of Cassius Howell really cemented it as well, because that's a different type of edge rusher than we've ever seen them go after. We talked about that when it happened. And now seeing them on the field, I tell you, the way I knew right away is after a day, I was like, I don't think we've seen Oren Burks one time. And that was their go-to when they needed to go heavy, like in a Ravens game, right? Or when the Browns are really running the ball. They would go to a 4-3 at times. But the second half of last year, it was very 3-4 coded in the way they were playing and attacking. And then now seeing it in camp, it is straight up. I don't know if we've seen a 4-3 play yet. It's been all three defensive tackles. And, I'm talking base defense, not the nickel, which nickel's the new base. This was a conversation in 2011. We're past that point. Talking about your base defense when you want to defend the run or go against heavy offensive teams. They are a 3-man defensive tackle front with 4 guys standing up, not to be confused with playing 4 linebackers. It just means 4 guys are in the 2-point stance, 2 of them being on the edge, typically defensive ends.
And what that comes with is the responsibilities for guys like Boye Mafe and Miles Murphy and Cassius Howell. And when he gets back, Shamar Stewart, which if you missed that news, we got good news on Shamar Stewart's injury, not expected to be a long-term injury. We still don't know what the recovery is going to look like. But for those guys, you got to be used to dropping out and playing a little bit of spot drop zone, a little bit in the flats, a little bit in hook curls to try to take windows away. And we've seen that from those guys over the course of the training camp practices early, which is driving some Bengals fans a little bit crazy. And I get it, because the selection of clips that we've seen, it looks like it's every single play somebody's dropping out into coverage. But part of that is, as we'll talk about when we get to the offensive part of today's show, what the Bengals are doing on offense, and the defense then matching those extra tight ends with their base package, which means if it's a passing play, one of those ends, because you're not always rushing 5, is going to have to drop out. And that can sometimes occupy a blocker, whether it's Amarius Mims or Orlando Brown. If you're dropping an edge out, we've seen that create pressure for the Bengals, because on the other side, then you get an end sometimes one-on-one with the tight end. And the ends are going to win those matchups most of the time in the NFL.
They better.
So, yeah, that's kind of your job. When you get a matchup that you should win, you got to win it. And so there are some advantages to that. And every now and then you'll see a guy steal an interception in those plays over the course of a season. But it's something
TJ Watt do it to the Bengals, right? That's the idea.
Yeah, Watt does it when he's rushing too, though, because he's an annoying freak that plays for the Steelers. But the point that I'm trying to make here is it's something that we're going to have to get used to seeing. It's a little bit different for this team. It's not like dropping Trey on a zone blitz on a nickel down. This is like we're in base, we're rushing 4, which means one of these guys has to drop out. So it's different from some of the ways they dropped ends out in the past, I think, but it is something that's going to take some getting used to.
And it's something they did with Joseph Osai at the highest rate of all their edges last year. So replacing him makes sense with like a Cassius Howell. If you're saying like, he was supposed to be our DN number 3, Cassius Howell going into that role, going to do a lot more of it. But also Boye Mafe dropped back into coverage with Seattle 180 times in his 4 years. So this is 2.7, if my math is correct, per game. So maybe it gets up to like 4 times per game. That's not a crazy amount. You'll notice it. But if they split it between Mafe doing it 4 times, Cassius Howell doing it 4 times, Murphy doing it 4 times, it won't drive you as insane. And the idea, again, is to create advantageous situations for the other guy, the opposing side edge rusher, but also defend the run. They struggled a lot of last year to really control the line of scrimmage and to keep their linebackers free. This is an effort to do that and to do it at a high rate. They have the defensive tackles. We talked all year about, or all offseason, about the strength they've created in that room, that defensive tackle room. The best way to do it is to get them on the field. Get 3 defensive tackles on the field. You do it in a 3-4 defense.
And you have guys that can win out there in your defensive tackle room as pass rushers. So Jonathan Allen is a guy that when he gets one-on-ones, he can still string together some pretty nasty pass rush moves. He can still put a pretty high-end bull rush on display and get after the quarterback. Dexter Lawrence, we talked about for 15 minutes on Saturday about the impact that he's made and the one-on-ones. Like when he gets a one-on-one, he's winning. When Jonathan Allen gets a one-on-one, he's going to win a lot of the time. So finding the pieces that can win in your defensive tackle room is a question, and they have a couple of guys that can do it. We'll see how BJ Hill does when he gets some one-on-one opportunities. We'll see how the rest of that depth shapes out, where we're going to talk about how that depth battle has played out so far. It's more or less been as expected for most of the battles through a few days. But like I said, we'll get to those a little bit later in the show. And then you need that end to get the matchups. Like the challenge becomes scheming up the matchups that you want, like getting the one-on-ones where you want the one-on-ones and then winning the one-on-ones when you have those opportunities. Because if you are dropping an end, and we've seen Joe Burrow go after this a few times, there are certain looks where quarterbacks are going to attack it and you're going to give up yards if you don't get home. And so that's the balancing act there a little bit. And something that, again, I think all defenses in the NFL will have to get accustomed to as the trend continues toward more tight ends being on the field and heavier offensive personnel packages.
Yeah, and when you're talking about the one-on-ones and winning those, the Bengals have collected 3 guys that are some of the most double defensive tackles in the league, right? Dexter Lawrence, BJ Hill, Jonathan Allen. Over the last, I think it was 5 years, the graphic I saw this offseason, those were 3 of the top 6 players in the league. And they're not going to see that. And Lawrence is still going to see a high rate, right? Because if you got to pick your poison, that's the one I do not want to deal with if I'm the opposing offense. But BJ Hill's going to see more one-on-ones than ever. Jonathan Allen, you want to keep his career going and keep him fresh, more one-on-ones than he has been seeing over the last 5 years. So that makes sense. This is how you create it. And if the listener's saying like, okay, well, what about nickel? What does that mean? Largely, it's probably going to mean 2 defensive tackles, and we'll see if when Shamar gets back, if they throw him in that mix on the inside. But 2 defensive tackles, and then it could be 2 stand-up edges. They could put their hand down. They would do this with Trey Hendrickson. They would do this with Joseph Osai. Sometimes they'd be up, sometimes they'd be down, depending on if it was like a nickel, we may have to defend the run, or a nickel, we're attacking this pass rush situation. So you're still going to see 4 rushers in nickel packages.
The other big trend from the first week or so, I guess it's really 3 practices, but the first part of training camp before the pads come on is that the linebackers have been making some plays. And that's something that we talked about a couple of days ago here on Locked On Bengals, something that you wanted to see. But the standout day for them was Thursday, where there were interceptions, tackles for loss, blowing up screen plays. And so there have been some early promising returns for the linebackers the Bengals will be relying on in year 2 as well. Coming up next, we're going to get into the offensive side for the first week of training camp. What have we seen from their approach, where we knew they were going to be getting under center, at least some. It's been something they've talked about enough, but it's been even more than I think either of us expected. We'll talk offense through 3 days of significant camp practices here coming up next.
The Locked On Bengals podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick on who you think will hit a home run in their game. And if you win, if you're right, you'll receive a profit boost for your next bet at a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged in every game, whether it's your favorite team, your favorite player, or you're just keeping an eye on the matchups and what's going on in the MLB. There's always a player going to hit a home run. I always feel like it's going to happen in these games. Can you call it? Can you be the one to do it? I always feel like I could. But join the action today at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play Daily Dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of the MLB. Jake, another big topic of the entire offseason was getting under center, running the ball, play action, creating explosives from this. We did a whole episode on the splits for Joe Burrow when he's dropping back to throw versus going under center versus using play action. We talked about how that's a part of his game that needs to expand, needs to get better at. The offense as a whole needs to get better at it because the rest of the league is creating so many explosives and chunk plays and high-level efficiency from under center using play action. The Bengals matched that thought, and Dan Pitcher talked about it. Joe Burrow was asked a ton about it. Zach Taylor was asked, and it seems like it's something they wanted to really implement and hone and maybe get good at this summer for the first time throughout the Joe Burrow era. And right away, I was skeptical because they've said these things in the past. I think we all a little bit were.
And we've seen them do it in certain parts of training camp. I think the big difference this year, not to cut you off entirely, is we're seeing it way more in the 11-on-11 periods. Keep going with your thought, though.
That's what's going to be the thought. Like, we've seen it before, and I've always felt like, yeah, but wait until 11-on-11, wait until red zone, wait until the game comes. But I think you agree, I agree, and I wonder if the listener feels the same way. It feels like they're doing it at an extremely high rate so far.
Way more than I thought. And it's been mixed returns, I would say. Like we've seen some positives for sure. And we've seen some mistakes, some underthrows from Joe Burrow. Bad interception today from Joe Burrow where Boye Mafe was harassing him on a bootleg play. And the underthrow to Jamar Chase to let DJ Turner back into the play was also a bootleg play. And so mixed returns from them getting under center, but that's really what they need to rep, right? They're comfortable in the shotgun stuff. They've been doing the shotgun stuff for years. And we saw on Saturday where they got down in the red zone at the end of the practice, which was a checkered practice for the offense, where the defensive line was getting pressure to Joe Burrow consistently. He threw 3 interceptable passes, 2 that were turnover-worthy plays, probably 1 that was more of a 50-50 opportunity where DJ Turner got in there. And then when they're back in the shotgun doing the things that they do, in the red zone, Joe Burrow looks awesome. He drops one in the perfect spot for Jamar Chase on a fade ball on a running play. Awesome release for Jamar Chase on the play. Absolutely knocks DJ Turner's hands down trying to press him. And then he's just free running to the corner to the back pylon. Joe drops it in perfectly. So beautiful ball, beautiful release from Jamar Chase on that play. RPO, yeah, the offensive line, you can tell is run blocking. You can see them firing upfield. And then the other one is a scramble drill to Mitch Tinsley where it's a 3-man rush. Dexter Lawrence gets pressure as we had seen throughout the practice, but Joe's able to reset. Maybe there's a hold on the play. We talked about that, I think, a little bit yesterday, but able to find Mitch Tinsley diving for a beautiful catch in his own right as he's competing for his job. And maybe these wide receiver roles are clarifying a little bit. We'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. But when they get into the shotgun in the red zone, Joe's cutting them up, and it looks comfortable. The offense had a good day down in the red zone on Saturday after an up and down day prior to that, where Burrow wasn't his most accurate self and was getting disrupted. And part of that is that I think they need to get reps of the under center stuff. They have not practiced it as much. They have not gone against live competition with it as much as they've done all these other things that they have so much experience doing over the last few seasons.
Do you remember when Jake Browning, this had to be 2023,
Yep.
I want to say going against the Browns, you already know where I'm going, right?
I
And
sure
he's
do.
like, stop with the boots, stop calling the boots, because he turns and there's a defender in his face every time he's just chucking it into the ground.
It was more emphatic than that. It was no more effing boots. We can't even say it on here.
Yeah. We can't even say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I think of when I watch Joe Burrow do the boot and no one's open, right? And I don't know for sure. There was one play in walkthroughs where Burrow turns around, Mafi's right in his face, and he's like, well, okay, we're just going to keep the walkthrough going. And then they do it in practice on Saturday, and Mafi's in his face again, and the unblocked guy just doesn't respect that the run's going to be there. They're not in pads yet. They're not really running it down their throats. They're not really establishing that level of running the ball. Even in red zone, you're not going to get into 12 personnel and run the ball probably because it requires pads at that level. So we'll see next week if they really get to it. But what I was going to say is even Burrow on that boot, I think he's like, let me just see if I can make something happen here. Because that's Drew Sample leaking out. Like, that's not your best option, which brings me to Eric All and how much he's been involved. Like right away, they were like, oh, we're going to have a ramp up process. And I think it was like the first play Eric All's in there, right? And he's blocking. And that's it was a crosser to Jamar Chase, right? Eric All comes back and blocks on the other side. And it's like, yeah, a ramp up process, but he clearly is involved in this and is going to make that 12 personnel work this year, or that's the hope. And we did see a play on Saturday where it was Mike Gesicki and Eric All. Once they got down there, it's like, that's fun. That's a lot of speed. That's a lot of versatility. You can do a lot with that, especially if Gesicki's at wide receiver, which we expect. And then Eric All can be your point man at tight end. I think that's the ultimate look of what it should look like, or when you need it to, because I'm a Drew Sample hater in a lot of ways. So when I saw that interception, I said, yeah, it's Drew Sample anyways.
The timing was off on it too. I just saw another angle of it as we were recording, and like Joe tries to pump, and I think he's trying to throw it to Drew Sample immediately because he's like, oh, there's going to be pressure. I got to get this to Drew quick. And then Drew didn't have his head around yet. And so he can't throw it yet. So there's a pump, and then he waits for Sample to get his head around, and then the ball comes out, and then it's behind, and there's a Jalen Davis pick.
Yeah, Jalen Davis. So that was what you're saying that I wanted to remember. I was going to bring this up in the first segment. They've matched a lot of nickel also in some of these base packages with Jalen Davis. Really, like, they're treating him like Mike Hilton at times in these flashes where it's like, hey, it's okay. You can cover Mike Gesicki. I don't know if you've seen some of the clips from Thursday's practice. Davis ends up on Gesicki a ton. They're just treating him like a third wide receiver. And I think that's part of, like, we've talked about the offense not blocking for Dexter Lawrence because he's not going to be there every day when you go face an opponent. Well, the defense is almost at times like being reactive to what the offense is showing them. And one of those things is they'll go 5 wide, one of them being Mike Gesicki and Eric All, and splitting them out, and how the defense reacts to it. Well, they're staying in nickel for a lot of those.
Yeah. And I think the Eric All factor, particularly interesting, just going back to that, like, if Eric All is your 12 personnel tight end and he's out there for both or multiple of your 12 personnel packages, does that eventually make him into your tight end one? Yes. Is this the year that Eric All, somebody unseats Drew Sample? Because Drew Sample is still going to be the pass protection tight end. There was a play on Saturday where you still see when they're in the shotgun in the red zone, Drew Sample is back there beside Joe Burrow, and he's the quote unquote running back alignment on that play. He's obviously never getting the handoff. He's back there strictly for pass protection purposes, maybe to be a check down if there's nobody for him to block. So he will continue to have that role. But if Eric All is out there with Drew Sample, but also with Mike Gesicki, when they want to do either of those flavors of their 12 personnel, or maybe it's Tanner Hudson in some packages, if they're rotating him in, or whoever it's going to be, then he becomes your de facto tight end one. And the ramp up process for him has looked pretty darn quick. My last thought here on the offense, Joe, was Doug Harris at his locker after Saturday's practice talked about facing Dexter Lawrence and the challenge that is, but also what I loved maybe the most out of what was a great locker room interview in general after a practice was talking about him understanding what the run game identity is going to be now. Like Ted being more confident in the run game and articulating that at this point in the offseason, where it feels like over the last few years, it's something they've had to kind of discover as the season goes on, or make wholesale changes, rebuild their run game. I think they found something that they liked last year. They had the continuity, and Ted described it as winning reach blocks, staying square, and Chase Brown finding a lane to use his speed. That was, and the entire thing was a fun conversation, a fun quote to end it on. And Joe, I want to ask you before we get into some of these camp battles, what you think that means for the run game and what that tells you about what their approach is going to be in the run game as we wrap up the show here coming up next. This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by Home Chef. Life gets busy, and sometimes you don't want to go do your grocery shopping and figure out what you're going to cook and figure out what ingredients you need and remember what you have in the pantry. Home Chef takes the stress out of it by delivering the fresh ingredients and easy-to-follow recipes right to your door. So you don't have to think about it. You just go out there and execute the plan that Home Chef has delivered to you. They've got 30 meal options every week, including calorie conscious and GLP-1 friendly meals. So there's something for every schedule and lifestyle, and people really love it. That's why Home Chef is rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And for a limited time, Home Chef is offering Locked On Bengals listeners 50% off and free shipping for your first box, plus free dessert for life. Go to homechef.com/LockedOnNFL to get started. That's homechef.com/LockedOnNFL for 50% off your first box, free shipping, free dessert for life. Again, homechef.com/LockedOnNFL. It must be an active subscriber to receive that free dessert. Joe, when you hear Ted Karras talk about reach blocks, what does that make you think? Staying square. We know they're a zone team. I think they're going to continue to be a zone team. That's what it evokes for me. What comes to mind for you when you hear Ted Karras talk about the run game that way?
That it's a full-fledged run game, again, similar to how it was probably in 2021, right? That was the last time they really were a heavy wide zone, because I think of wide zone running when you think of that. I think of the mid zone, the way it was described when we talked to Orlando Brown Jr. as well, and the little bit of differences between the two. And that was something that they really leaned on and got really good at in the second half of last year when the running offense really had a really good high efficiency rate and success rate. And the way Joe Burrow talked about, after Jamar Chase, the number 2 guy like that we're going to feed in this offense is Chase Brown, and the type of confidence they have in him at running back. I believe the team believes in Chase Brown and that he is a very good component, not just in this offense and a great fit in this offense, that they can expand what they've been doing, and they found a home with what he is as the centerpiece of their run game. So that makes me excited for the offense next year.
Did you hear Joe Burrow talk about Chase Brown in his presser last week?
Did I hear it? Yeah. Why
Yeah.
Did you think he sounded like this guy's you should extend him type thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of that involved, I think, but it's like, yeah, I mean, we're going to get Jamar the ball a lot here, but Chase Brown's number 2, and Chase Brown's probably going to get more touches than Jamar over the course of a season. Maybe Jamar will have more. Nope, because Chase Brown's going to have like 250 carries if he's
But
healthy.
designing plays for him, I think that's what he meant.
Yeah, but getting the ball to him because he is a play. Yeah. And it's a little bit surprising to hear that. Like, when you're rational about it, you understand that running backs get a lot of touches because they get handoffs, and Chase Brown's a bell cow for this team. But you would think T. Higgins would be the guy after Jamar Chase that would come to mind for Joe Burrow. But for Joe, it was a Chase Brown point. But to your point, the Bengals last year, 6th in the NFL in EPA per carry, which probably wouldn't think of if we hadn't told you that. The everydayers have heard us talk about that in the past. They've heard us talk about the success rate for this team as a running team as well. So they really found something last year in the run game. Exciting to hear them feel like they have a good handle on what that identity is going to be going into this season. But along with that could be getting into the roster battles conversation here to wrap things up, Joe. How we're seeing these wide receivers being used to start with that roster battle. There's some questions about whether they were bringing competition for Andre Josevich over the course of the offseason. It looks like what could be developing here, and I'm speculating at this point, but we'll see what plays out over the next few weeks, is Andre Josevich might be like their 11 personnel wide receiver 3, and Mitch Tinsley might be their 12 personnel wide receiver 3, where if they want to get somebody out there on the field to do some of the motion stuff that we've seen at the time of the snap to try to misdirect defenses and be a good run blocker, they might really like Mitch Tinsley's run blocking. That might be what Mitch Tinsley's role is here, because you go back to Saturday's practice, or 12 personnel in the red zone. Mitch Tinsley's out there because T has an off day, and Mitch is out there both on a run pass option where he's blocking on a play, and then he catches a touchdown in the scramble drill on the next play, which goes to show you that the connection that he's got. It was a really good awareness of where Joe Burrow broke the pocket and got outside to break off his route and get in phase with the quarterback, and Joe Burrow trusting Mitch Tinsley to come down with that ball.
Yeah, and if you're confused, how can you have a wide receiver 3 and 12 personnel? Well, what he means is when you have 2 wide receivers out there, a lot of times it's not just Jamar and T in the 12 personnel packages. A lot of times you're saying, let me get one guy that can run block. And it's been a bunch of different guys, right? Mike Thomas used to get into this role, and you'll see other teams that really lean on their one blocker. And it seemed like Mitch Tinsley is that guy. A lot of motion with him, some wind back stuff, some orbit motion, jet motion, and then just straight up on the edge of the line of scrimmage. They did some insert into like the C gap last year and B gaps, which I thought was cool as well. But they'll put him right on the edge, almost like a tight end, a move tight end, and they'll have him go up and get a linebacker or get the slot corner out of there. And yeah, I think if that's a clear-cut role for Mitch Tinsley, because he doesn't do a ton on special teams, what this does is keep him in the active roster, number one. But number two, yeah, I think they can designer a little bit what this wide receiver room looks like after Jamar and T. You can kind of say, all right, Yoshi, you've been in the offense for a long time. You've got size. You got good vertical speed. Maybe you're not the most fluid guy. Maybe you're not the best blocker.
And that's where they're using him too. Like the amount of deep balls for Joseph through
a
few training camp practices. Sorry if you were going to get there anyway.
You're right. Bring it up.
Like
You're right. It helps me.
They're going deep for Yoshi in these training camp practices, which like you think about this offense, you think about T vertically, you think about Jamar vertically, and they've gotten their targets too, but a lot of deep targets for Andre Joseph, more than anywhere else he's getting targeted. He had that toe drag swag catch on the sideline too, to give him credit for that one.
But that's because he's been getting deep on DJ Turner as well. So, right, Turner's got to bail and open up a little bit, and then he throttles down and hits that sideline route and makes the catch. Like, Yoshi has that ability. We know that. If you're going to line these guys up and who the battle is for wide receiver 3, if it is a battle, and that's what we're talking about right now, he's the fastest. He's the biggest of those guys. Does he have the contested catches that Mitchell Tinsley has? No, I think Tinsley's the best at that. Colby Young, we still have to see. Charlie Jones, we still see him in flashes once in a while in camp like we always have. But again, they need to preserve him a little bit. So that rotation there, plus Mike Gesicki, we talked about forever being a wide receiver. If that's a full rotation between Tinsley, Yoshi, and Gesicki, I think that's fun. And that's how you keep defenses off balance.
And to keep those guys fresh, you have specialized roles that they can excel in. Obviously, there needs to be cross-training. Injuries do occur in the NFL. We know that. Kobe Young, good shout out on Kobe Young. I think the work he's getting with the one shows that there is, I think, hope for him to take on a bigger role in this offense as well. And we'll see what his rookie year has in store. But really what that boils down to is who's competing for wide receiver 6, where that's probably going to be a return man. That's what we talked about after hearing the coaches talking mock turtle soup. Darren Simmons talking about the Keyshawn Williams, Charlie Jones battle there, but Noah Thomas keeps making plays with the twos. And it was 2 straight practices for him, not counting the walkthrough on Thursday and on Saturday, where it sounds like he had some impressive grabs, one of which we saw on camera, the highlight play with DJ Ivy in coverage. So, can he carve out a role? Is he just going to be headed to the practice squad? What are these guys going to do in the games? The games obviously dictate a lot here, but through 1 week, that's what we're seeing on the offensive side of wide receiver. For the backup offensive line, it looks like Cody Ford is going to be a backup tackle. It's going to be Jalen Coker competing for that second tackle spot, competing for one of the final spots on the 53-man roster. Those are the 2 guys we've seen primarily with the 2s at tackle. And on the interior, looks like it's going to be Brian Parker and Jalen Rivers. Jalen Rivers training, from what we've seen, only at left guard so far. Brian Parker playing right guard so far. On the defensive side of the ball, Joe, Jalen Davis's job to lose at slot corner, but Jasir Taylor still getting some work with the number 1s for that job.
And he almost made a play on an interception that he dropped. But honestly, a really good, I think if any defensive backs coach looks at that and says, yeah, you got to make that pick. But his back is turned as he's bicycle turning, away from the quarterback, gets his head around, high points it in front of Yoshi. It's a really good show of movement skills and ball skills to at least get it and accurately make a play on the ball despite not bringing it in. So Jasir Taylor's getting a few reps here and there with the 1s. We are not seeing any of Braylon Lux, breaking my heart so far through 1 week. He was with the number 2s. Tacario Davis made a play this past Saturday, and I saw Braylon Lux was with him. So I was like, okay, he's a little bit in there. He still, has a chance. But yeah, I think the corner position is Jalen Davis's job to lose at this point. I think they like him. They like his attitude. They need some dogs on defense, right? We've been talking about that for years, and he has that. And one final note, if we want, Kyle Duggar, number 2 safety, free safety a lot. We are not seeing him mixed in, and we've had hopes for that. Maybe it'll develop. Maybe it'll happen. Maybe they're happy with what they have right now at linebacker and slot corner and don't feel the need to do it.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. We talked a lot about the potential creative applications for Kyle Duggar to plug holes both in the safety room and as a hybrid linebacker. That doesn't seem to be the direction the Bengals are going so far. We'll see if that changes or not. But so far, like you said, Joe, that's what we've been seeing on the Kyle Duggar end of things. The last thing for a position battle, a depth battle on the interior defensive line has been Chris Jenkins getting a lot of reps. We've heard that Landon Robinson got in on a splash play where he might have combined with the sack for Cassius Howell on Joe Flacco with the twos. Haven't heard McKinley Jackson's name. Haven't really heard Chris Jenkins' name in terms of making a play. We saw him get tossed by Orlando Brown on a play, but he is still the guy that is the next guy up, as it were, behind, I think, the veterans, where there's a clear 1 through 4 with Dexter Lawrence, BJ Hill, John Allen, TJ Slayton. Then that fifth guy has been Chris Jenkins so far. We'll need to see how those guys play, I think, in games to really determine how that battle is going to go. But the early opportunities going to Chris Jenkins. Are there any roster battles we're not getting to? Haven't really heard from Jack Endries yet.
No.
Really hoping that we get a look at him at some point here in training camp. And again, maybe it'll be the preseason there.
A little
maybe
bit of Taj Brooks.
Destined to the practice squad. Yeah. Taj Brooks is a good shot. We have seen Taj Brooks get at least a little bit of work with the ones where clear RB3 there. There's not really competition there, but how much they trust him and how big his role will be, I think, determined by how he plays this preseason.
Yeah, and I was going to also say that, other than Taj Brooks there, that Jack Endries, maybe that'll come. Tight ends are a slow starting position, and we shouldn't expect it just right now. And also to replace Shamar Stewart has been Cedric Johnson, Isaiah Foskey, kind of two different types of players, but that is a development that we'll keep talking about until Shamar returns.
Yeah, and no Antoine Powell-Ryland also to your despair, along with Braylon Lux, I'm sure. Tough day here for the Joe Goodberry guys. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. The next time the Bengals practice will be Monday, so we'll have you covered after that one. And if you're interested in keeping up on what's going on with some of the other teams around the NFL, the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs has you covered with all the details going on around the league. If you're interested in checking that out, that is also part of our fantastic network here, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Until next time, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.